near Aachen in 1925, and I grew up in Linnich as a child. I have a lot of good and bad recollections. The good recollections are the Jewish community, the synagogue, my parents' home. I was an only son in the human family. And I was favored and spoiled as a child very much. Linnich was from medieval times called a city, even though the total population was 2,500 inhabitants, out of which there were 30 families who were Jewish. I knew all of them, and I could tell you now where each one of them lived, in what part of town, with wonderful, wonderful parents, a father and a mother, and two half-sisters from my father's first wife, who passed away very young. Before I was born, he waited 2 years after she passed away and married my mother. She was the daughter of a first cousin. His mother-in-law was his first cousin, and they were at first name basis all their lives. Upstairs lived my father's brother, whom I mentioned before, the tailor, with his wife, and they also had 2 daughters. And we all had separate bedrooms in the house. It was quite a nice house. It was destroyed in the Second World War and again rebuilt afterwards. It still exists today. Marstraße 21. Linnich had a Jewish public school, but there weren't enough students to have separate classes for each grade. So all the 7 grades were in one room. There was a total between 18 and 20 or 21 students. And in my class, there was just me. We had a beautiful classroom and a most wonderful teacher, Max Gottlieb, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocho, who was the greatest influence in my life, probably, until this day. School was regular school. He was a genius of a teacher, and he was able to teach 7 grades in one classroom. It's a nice-sized classroom. Till the Nazis forced us out. We had to move to one of the rooms in the basement of the synagogue, which happened to have been a very nice room, and we were very comfortable. The school was not too large, and that's where we were till Kristallnacht. I was taken to shul at a young age, and there was a special bench for the children, the boys, and I absorbed the melodies from very young childhood on. They were all the same. The melodies didn't change. They were the same melodies. Shabbos prayers to holiday prayers. My father was the Baal Shachris on Yom Noraim. He was also the president of the Gemilus Chasodim Society that dealt with all the charities that Jews were giving in Linnich. Ein kamocha v'Elohim Hashem, ve'ein k'maasecha מלכותך מלכות כל העולמים, וממשלתך בכל דור. השם מלך, השם מולך, השם ימלוך לעולם ועד. השם עולמו ייתן, שם יבורך עמו בשלום, ויהי בלשון האורן, ויאמר משה, קומו השם, ויפוצו אויביך, וינוסו משנאיך מפניך, כי מציון תצא סורו, ונשם מירושלים. השם מבוא אלפי ישראל, קומו השם למנוחותיך, אתה עוונותיך, כהניך ילבשו צדק, וחסידיך ירננו. בעבור דוד עבדך, אל תוצא בני משיחך, כי לקח טוב נוסעתי לכם, תוציאה תעזוב עץ חיים היא, למחזיקים בו, וסמכהו מיושר, דוחהו דחי נועם, כל צבאותיו שלום. השיבנו השם אליך, ונשובו לשומנו כקדם, לשומנו כקדם. November 10th, 1938, Kristallnacht, as it is called, was the worst day of my life. It started off quite well. We all went to school. We were in school. We had already heard that some Jewish cemeteries were being damaged in the area, and we didn't know what to expect. At about 10 or 11 in the morning, the only policeman that Lineage had, who was always friendly to us, came and said, "School is dismissed. Everybody please go home." That was, since the school was in the basement of the synagogue, that was a way of saving our lives, of course. Now, we all went home, and the older kids went to the younger kids, and the teacher went with a few people, including myself, to where we lived, and my parents were ecstatically happy to see me when I came in, because they had already heard all kinds of things happening on that day. It was a good thing that the school was dismissed, because in the afternoon of that day the synagogue was destroyed, including the school. Everything was burned down. So we were home, and about an hour later, the front door was broken in, and about 15 obviously Nazis, none of them recognizable because they were not from Lineage, came in to destroy the store. They turned over everything and broke all the glasses and cut the merchandise. We were in the back of the house, so we were not in the front. And thank God they didn't come into our house where we lived, nor the upstairs where my uncle and aunt lived. They stayed in the store and did their destruction in the store, where everything they could possibly destroy, while being there just for a few minutes. In they came and out they went. We didn't know what would have happened next, if they would come back or what would be. It was a terrible experience. And in order to save me, my parents made me go over the side of the house. There was a wall to the neighbors, and the neighbors hit me in the empty space behind their safe, which they had a large safe in their home. For a few hours till the middle of the afternoon, and then they let me go. They let me go home. It was a horrible experience from beginning to end, because you felt totally at loss. You felt totally at loss in your being on what was happening. We phoned to the rest of the family to find out if they were home and what was doing with them. Our cousin who lived in Holland, my father's cousin who lived in Holland, had been wanting to come and visit us. And she always put off the visit. When did she come? A few days before Kristallnacht. And when she saw what was happening, she packed up her valise and went to the railway station and took a train back to Holland. My bar mitzvah took place 3 weeks after the synagogue was burned down. No guests came, no parties were planned, and thank God services were held in the home of a rather poor family, a few minutes walk from our house. Chairs were set up. The teacher was back from concentration camp with all his hair shorn off. And the bar mitzvah went on the day it was supposed to be. Since all the Torahs were burned from our synagogue, my father, I don't know how, got a Sefer Torah from the Gestapo to be used for the bar mitzvah. Now, after this, there was no more school. And I did get some private lessons from the teacher. And we tried to get into France, which meant you had to get a children's visa into the passport. So we made a passport, and that was easy to get. And then it took a while. It took from December, from the bar mitzvah, till May of the next year to get a visa, to get the appointments all finished in Cologne, where the French consulate was, and to get a visa stamped into the children's passport. Finally, the French visa came through, and my parents scheduled my trip for the very next day, which was Lag BaOmer, my freedom trip. My escape to freedom. The yeshiva was my first exposure to Torah Sheba'al Peh. I had learned already some Rashi, but here I was introduced to the Gemara. Even though the Gemara teacher, Rav Chaikin Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, was a Litvak, and used to say it's Halocha Lemes Misinai, which I didn't know what he was talking about. And for the first time, I heard also a lot of Yiddish besides French. And the French I found very easy to acquire. It was a sort of a natural development. That for the 2 years I was in France, I became pretty fluent in French. I was in the yeshiva in Neudorf, a suburb of Strasbourg, from the day I arrived in France in May till September 1st when the war broke out. The whole yeshiva moved to a little village in the Vosges Mountains, and from there we were taken to Marseille, where we stayed from then on till it was time to get to America. And in Marseille, the most important thing that happened to me was that there was a Jewish restaurant owned by a gentleman by the name of Franz, who was a Galiciano. And the most important thing that happened to me, and which was a wonderful thing for my life, was that I shed my terrible prejudices which I had against Jews from Eastern Europe. He was such a wonderful man, and he was such a wonderful teacher to us. I shed all my prejudices. I really loved the man. Apparently, Mrs. Roosevelt took an interest, unlike her husband, to bring Jewish children from Europe to America. And so a chance was open for people to be saved. But the exit age for being a child was 16. Consequently, they started taking those who were 15. Luckily, I was among them. That's really how we were taken first to Marseille, and then near the Spanish border, and we were given a transit visa through Spain into Portugal, and eventually the visa to the United States. On the boat, the Muzinho, we were a couple of hundred children, but also almost the whole Jewish community from Luxembourg, including the chief rabbi. Thank God, after less than a 2-week trip, we arrived in New York. First of all, my stomach quieted down. Secondly, when you saw the Statue of Liberty that you had heard about before, you said, thank God you have saved your life from not being in Europe.